Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or Kadin, currently holds the chairmanship of ASEAN Businesses Advisory Council. By this chairmanship, Kadin is committed to support the success of Indonesia's chairmanship, and our TVRI World reporter Aryo Bagus has more.
Today's main agenda of the 29th ASEAN Economic Ministers Retreat 2023 was preceded by the ASEAN Economic Ministers and ASEAN Business Advisory Council consultation this morning. Both ASEAN Economic Ministers and ASEAN Business Advisory Council, chaired by the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or Kadin, meet to discuss the implementation of ASEAN economic cooperation to boost ASEAN economic growth in the future. And joining me now, the chairman of Kadin, Arsyad Rashid, who will explain more on this matter. Pa Arsyad, thank you so much for joining us on our focus today. So what are the Kadin's commitment to support this year's ASEAN under Indonesia's chairmanship?
First of all, Kadin, as the host of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, and also, fortunately, I am the chair of the ASEAN BAC, they call it, and also the chair of Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Our goal is actually how to align, first of all, with the government chairmanship. As you know, President Joko Widodo is the chair of the ASEAN, and this is where we align between the private sectors and the government. And in Indonesia, we call it Indonesia Incorporated. Yeah. And so what we bring, the spirit of this, where government and private sectors work together up to the level in ASEAN. So we want to create what we call ASEAN Incorporated, where the ASEAN businesses with the ASEAN's governments, yeah, of each nation are working together to actually deliver an economic framework that will actually develop the ASEAN economy moving forwards, especially with all the challenges that we have today. And with that, actually, we brought 5 priorities to the ASEAN Business Advisory Councils, in which number 1 is what we call the digital transformation, in which we have 2 legacies in there. On digital transformation, we have the ASEAN QR code, and we have the wiki entrepreneurship, and also actually another one is actually the digital platform on lending within ASEAN. And this is all focusing for micro, small, medium enterprises. Yeah. And that's one. And also we want to make sure to strengthen the health resilience within ASEAN. And this is very, very important, whereby we bring in the legacy, what we call one-shot campaign. This is in regards to vaccination, not only for COVID, but for all others, tuberculosis and others. This is very, very important. And then also on the transition of economy to renewable and sustainability. Here we have sustainable development priorities, where we have 2 legacies in this. One is what we call the ASEAN Net Zero Hub. This is something that we have in Indonesia, we call Kadin Net Zero Hub. We're bringing into the ASEAN conversation. And another one is actually the legacy of what we call the Carbon Center of Excellence. Yeah. This is something, a legacy that Indonesia introduces during the G20, and we are now bringing that conversation to ASEAN too. And more than that, we also have what we call food security. It is one of the aspects that is very important today, you know, with all the geopolitical situation, how food prices has been up, and even scarcity of food. And so it is very important for ASEAN to have a food security, and on this we brought in the model of Indonesian model we call inclusive closed model, or pendampingan UMKM melekat. Yeah. And this is something where large corporation is helping small corporation or even farmers. So that is what we brought in. Besides that, we also have another priority, which is what we call trade and investment facilitation, which is very, very important also. How to actually increase trades within ASEAN, but most importantly, how to actually, for ASEAN companies to focus more in investing within ASEAN. Because we have 700 million people, and we want to make sure that, you know, we have this market, but not only market, but we are not just a market, but we are participating in a market in investment and for the benefit of ASEAN people, with 700 million people.
Okay, and then could you please share to us on implementation and response of ASEAN countries and related parties in supporting programs proposed by Indonesia and its capacity as 2023 chair of ASEAN?
We've been actually doing a roadshow. Yeah, we've been to Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, and then we are going to move forward also visiting Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, yeah, and even our newly, our good neighbors Timor-Leste, who is now the observer of ASEAN. And so far, the response from all the business community are very, very well. They are really waiting for Indonesian chairmanship. And here, I think the priorities that we bring into this ASEAN conversation are very fully supported by the business. But more than that, we just had the meetings with the economic ministers in ASEAN, chaired by Pak Menteri Zulkifli Hasan, who is our trade minister. And the response from each of the ministers in ASEAN are very much very, very supportive. And not only that, they are keen to work together, and they are keen to have the spirits of what we call the ASEAN Incorporated, where business sectors and the government are co-driving the economic development in this region. So I'm very, very happy on this positive response and fully support by all the governments in ASEAN. So now the challenge is how to make this happen and to make sure that we can overcome any challenges and be sure also at the same time be able to showcase what we have done and what we can actually offer to the world, because ASEAN as one is the theme of ASEAN Business Advisory Councils, which we picked it from the government theme of ASEAN Matters, epicenter of growth, and we take that epicenter of growth as the economic growth in ASEAN, and we say ASEAN centrality, innovating towards a greater inclusivity. So after this, we will also be going to our dialogue partners once we know what we want as ASEAN, yeah? And we will be visiting the US, China, all the other dialogue partners, EU and so forth, and to also say we want to bring in, this is what ASEAN voice, or the business voice, and how the dialogue partners can participate in this economic development and be part of the epicenter of growth.
Next question will be, what are Indonesia's leading sectors in economy? Could you please elaborate?
Yeah, first of all, when we talk about Indonesia, of course, right? The GDP contribution the largest come from manufacturing, and that is the right thing, because that is something that we are pushing. And as you know, our government, President Joko Widodo, always talking about value added, always about downstreaming. And this is, I think, is welcome not only in Indonesia, but in ASEAN. Yeah? And this downstreaming of industry is very, very key important to create more jobs, to create more value for Indonesian people. And this is where we want to push. But besides manufacturing, food is another thing that is actually part of this, right? But then overall, again, is the other strategy of how to create the net zero emission program that we have, which is the strategy of electric vehicles, yeah? Where Indonesia, have one of the foundation or the biggest, component that is needed for electric vehicles, which is battery, which is what? Nickel. We contribute 40% more of the nickel to the world. And now we are also talking to the Philippines, who is contributing more than 10% of the nickels of the world. Why don't we? And at the same time, to actually complete our strategy, Kadin Indonesia have signed an agreement with Australia. This is an MOU that is actually led from the discussion or from the challenge of President Joko Widodo when he spoke at the B20 and he was challenging the Prime Minister Albanese of Australia to say, Indonesia have nickels, you have lithium. Why don't we work together? Why don't we create this together? And with that, the follow-up of that, we've signed that agreement. And so that Australia is open for Indonesian to work on lithium and to do co-investing in creating this value added together.
All right, then the next question, Pak Arsyad. How could Kadin be involved in achieving 7 priority economic deliverables or PED proposed by Indonesia?
Number one is that Kadin, or first of all, the ASEAN BAC, yeah, the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, support the PEDs through this legacy and also the policy reforms. Yeah. And we want to make sure that these priorities that we have, which is part of the PEDs, which is include digital transformation, trade and investment facilitation, the sustainable development, security, and also the health resilience. Yeah. So, and then also in regards to the RCEP, right? That we are committed to optimizing this, how to become a more engaging and accommodative, actually, platform for business interests. Of course, still needs a lot of work. Still also, we need to have more inputs to give to the government to actually improve on the RCEP. But this is something as also a tools that actually we must support, and I think it can be something we can work on. Another thing that we actually recognize is the potential of the ASEAN Single Window, or ASW initiative, to actually simplify on the custom clearance procedures, and of course by that enhancing trade efficiency within the region. But we also propose that, with the digitalization today, we should be digitalizing all this, what we call the ASEAN Single Window, because with the technology today, I think it's going to be more and more for us to be able to actually be more efficient and actually productive in that way. So digitalization is also another key to actually improve this so-called ASEAN Single Window initiative. But again, as an overall, we are committed to actually working closely with the Indonesian government, but also with the ASEAN governments and also our colleague in ASEAN businesses. Yeah, again to make sure that Indonesia's chairmanship, as Indonesia is advancing towards ASEAN leadership, to realize these 7 PEDs that you mentioned. Again, this is an alignment of what we call Indonesia Incorporated, and with alignment of what we call ASEAN Incorporated.
All right, Pak Arsyad, then about Kadin itself, which trade chambers of other ASEAN countries that are close partners to Kadin, and could what cooperation are established between Kadin and fellow trade chambers of other countries?
I think we are close to all, right? Of course, every country is unique, In some country you have 1 chambers. In other countries you have 2 or 3, depending on the country itself, right? But every time we visited the country, we visited and we have conversation and discussion with all the Chamber of Commerce and Industries, and to make sure that we have this cooperation. And because the key factors, or the key word, is inclusivity. We cannot leave anybody behind. And so in that aspect, I think we have a very good relationship, and hope to actually, again, to focus how to make sure that micro, small, medium enterprises in Indonesia and also in ASEAN are able to interact, able to trade and co-invest, and more than that, how to make sure that they are upgraded. To make sure micro becomes small, from small become medium, medium become large corporation. And that's the goal of Kadin Indonesia.
All right, Pak Arsyad Rashid, thank you so much, the chairman of Kadin, for sharing your thoughts and your views on our focus today. So the 29th ASEAN Economic Ministers Retreat 2023 ends today, and the expected outcome is in the form of joint statement among ASEAN countries that will be brought at the ASEAN Economic Ministerials meeting, also attended by several ASEAN partners in trade and economic sectors. And that wraps our report from Borobudur, Magelang, Central Java. Aryo Bagus and Danudirja as a camera person reporting for TVRI World. Back to you in the studio.